What do you do when you encounter or witness something that you think is genuinely wrong? Something that you may believe is destructive, even if it doesn't pose an immediate physical threat. How do you encounter the other? Those were some of the questions that I was thinking about when I was asked this week by a number of different news outlets to comment on events in Jerusalem, at what is often called Judaism's holiest site, the Western Wall, where news was made. Quick background, what happened? The group Women of the Wall, which has fought for years for their right, people may dispute that term, I believe it, their right to worship as they choose to at the Western Wall, to read from the Torah publicly, and to perform other religious acts that in the Orthodox community are mostly and most typically reserved for men alone. It turns out that at the Western Wall, because of the place's importance, and because it's a gathering place for more extreme religionists, when Women of the Wall goes to pray, it can be incredibly explosive. And unfortunately, that has too often meant that their rights have been limited to please others. This week, with the help of men on the men's side, because separate seating or standing is enforced there in accordance with Orthodox tradition, men took a large Torah scroll, passed it over, technically illegal, to the women's side, and the women read from it. A riot ensued, and I was asked to explain what the riot was about, why ultra-Orthodox men were so, and women too, by the way, but the men so impassioned that they not only started to riot, but actually injured Charlie Kalish, the gentleman who passed the Torah scroll over to the women's side. What was going on? Why would people behave that way? And I realized that, to some extent, I didn't want to simply explain away or make sense of what was happening. I wanted us to think about, how do we deal with those who make us nuts? You see, my point to the ultra-Orthodox men who rioted that morning would not be to try and convince them why my views are right and theirs are wrong. It's not going to happen anyway, and think how much time we waste on that. My question would be instead, and it's based on experience in doing this kind of stuff, rather than convincing them, to simply ask them to use their own system to perhaps find a better response, even if we're not going to agree about what the proper solution is. In this case, I would want them to know, where does love of a fellow Jew, also a deep tradition, honored in that community, alongside what they see as the prohibition against women reading from the Torah? Where does love of a fellow Jew factor into their thinking when they respond to those events? See, I think often we encounter the other with the expectation that if we could just get them to see things properly, they would agree with us. In fact, we end up often being just as evangelical toward those whose evangelism we may resist. We may be just as demanding on those who we see as coercive of us. And while there is a public policy fight to be fought in the courts in Israel around this issue, in the immediate term we confront the other. Why not simply appreciate their system enough to see if we can help them find categories that would not change their views, but would help them to express them in a safer, more constructive way? In this case, there isn't going to be agreement in the near term about the Western Wall. But we could raise up the category of love of a co-religionist, let alone a fellow human being, and ask what role that equally traditional category has in helping us walk through this moment of religious conflict.